Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Dr. Jeremy Kuzmarov. He is the editor over at covertactionmagazine.com and one of the world's foremost experts on the miscreant activities of the intelligence agencies. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and today we're hanging out with Dr. Jeremy Kuzmarov. And let me show you his great site before we get started. It is Covert Action Magazine. That's right, covertactionmagazine.com. It was started by a former CIA agent, I guess, named Phil Agee. And it covers all kinds of stuff regarding covert action all over the world. You can see great stuff. Here's something that's interesting. Go to their series, right? Section. They got a series on 9/11, Biden, you name it, Israel, political assassinations. Look at that. Let me click on the 9/11 one. Look at this. Saudi networks behind 9/11. Newly classified documents revealed that President George W. Bush authorized the shoot down of hijacked airplanes on 9/11, but only after 3 planes. Look at that. All this stuff. All this 9/11 stuff, right? So you can do that on 9/11. And there's lots of other great series, Biden, political assassinations, the war in Ukraine. So the bottom line is, this is a great site. If you want to learn a lot about the stuff that you're really interested in, go to covertactionmagazine.com. All right, let's get started on the articles and issues of the day. We're going to talk about another great article. This is awesome. Cointelpro operations helped create today's dystopian political environment. That's important because people look at what's here today and they don't connect it to the past. Let me just read the first couple paragraphs. Today's bleak political landscape with 2 essentially right-wing parties and no effective political operations. Opposition has its roots in the McCarthy era and Cold War FBI counterintelligence operations, Cointelpro, whose purpose was to infiltrate and destroy the political left. One of the tactics adopted under Cointelpro was infiltrate left-wing parties and groups like the Socialist Workers Party, Black Panthers Party, Students for a Democratic Society, in order to foment divisions with them and internecine conflict. Agent provocateurs were planted who would adopt extremist positions and promote violent and counterproductive protest activity. So we could go on. And one of the things I think that is really, really interesting is the information on the Patty Hearst kidnapping, mind control, and the secret history of Donald DeFreeze and the Symbionese Liberation Army. You know, that whole SLA thing, even the name. Boy, that sounds CIA, the Symbionese Liberation Army. That just sounds CIA-ish. What do we need to know about that, Jeremy?
Well, this story is very significant, as far as, understanding where we are today with 2, right-wing parties and no left. I mean, the 60s saw the emergence, of the new left. The old left was rooted in the Communist Party, Socialist Party, particular, it was rooted in labor unions and working class movement. The new left was more supportive of civil rights, women's rights, anti-war, and it was based on the college campuses, and you had these Students for Democratic Society, and there were efforts to kind of bridge the new left with the old left. And one figure we can discuss another time who was doing a bit of that was Walter Reuther, who was the head of the United Auto Workers Union. And guess what happened to him? He died in a suspicious plane crash. But
another one of those, huh?
Yeah. And and there's a new book about that I just received, and I'm doing a review that'll be published in the fall. So it's all tied together because, I mean, this was a threat to the ruling establishment. The new left brought a lot of energy into politics and offered the potential for something that could really, change the dynamic of American society, move the country toward more pacifist-oriented values, fairer economy, etc. So this, promising movement had to be destroyed and made to look like the youth who were involved in social protest movements and the counterculture in the 60s were, bad and were terrorists. So the CIA created offshoots of these movements with the goal of discrediting entire counterculture and protest movements of that era, and ideal of the hippie movement, which also looked to the Native American culture as more being able to live more in tune with the environment, less violent, less materialistic, which drove a lot of the violence. So one creation, and the Bay Area, California and San Francisco was a center the political activism in the 60s. You had the Berkeley free speech movement, and things grew, with the Haight-Ashbury, and the counterculture was strongly rooted there. So the CIA, dirty tricks was to create this group, a violent left-wing cult that used some of the rhetoric of SDS, but took it to the extreme. So, it's designed to alienate people, like, calling all police pigs, and that kind of rhetoric would alienate middle America, even if a lot of middle America was opposed to the Vietnam War. And yeah, this book by Brad Schreiber is really outstanding. It was published a few years ago. And there was also some reports by Mae Brussel, was a great deep state researcher, was a housewife from California, who started reading more and more newspapers and into things like the Kennedy assassination, and then developed, I think, her own newsletter and radio program in the 60s and 70s. And I forget, she died, I think, maybe in the 80s or 90s. And she was also reporting on this. And the evidence is overwhelming that, and what Schreiber and her described was how they called the CIA, and they used criminals. So there was this guy named Donald DeFreeze, who's a criminal from Cleveland, Ohio, and he was a black man, and they basically groomed him to be the leader of this violent cult-like group. And he had nothing to lose because he was facing a lot of jail time, and they sent him to this mental health facility / prison in California, Vacaville, which was a headquarter for a lot of the MK Ultra mind control experiments, where they would hypnotize and brainwash people and get them to do criminal acts or become assassins. So the project in this case was to turn him in, and he had certain charismatic features. They selected him because he had certain charismatic features. And that was the era of the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers, and a lot of white leftists kind of revered some figures in the Black Panther movement and their bravado. So they tried to exploit that and manipulate that by recruiting this individual, grooming him, subjecting him to mind control experiments, transforming him into this cult leader who would manipulate these youth to join this violent cult-like organization that they called the Symbionese Liberation Army. And then, and the key figure was a guy named Colton Westbrook, who was identified as a CIA agent who worked for the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, which is a bastard offshoot of the CIA that was set up in South Korea and carried out all kinds of repressive, and it was basically considered a Gestapo type organization that would kidnap people, even in exile, and specialized in black propaganda and misinformation. So he was part of that, and then he worked in Vietnam for the Phoenix Project.
Wow.
For the cover of some construction company. And then he was he was set up, his cover with that. Then they gave him a professorship at Berkeley. And I think we've discussed before how closely tied the CIA and academia is, even supposedly left-wing institutions like Berkeley, which, I mean, and that would be an obvious place to plant CIA agents because you had the free speech movement there, and a lot of the students were turning radical, so they had to co-opt them and they had to exploit and try and manipulate that. So Westbrook would recruit his students. He taught like anthropology courses and African American studies, and you had these youth. A lot of them were compassionate youth who were wanted progressive social change, were concerned about mistreatment of African Americans and other injustices in American life. And they manipulated these students to recruit them into the Symbionese. So Westbrook would recruit his own students to join the Symbionese Liberation Army, and they groomed this guy to freeze, and like the goal was to turn him into this cult leader, and they told him what to say and do. And like the Symbionese Liberation, their rhetoric was over the top. It's an effective social movement tries to build a broad base, and that's a tactic for organizing. And often they have to be strategic and careful about how they frame things. And this group framed it in the most inflammatory way, designed to alienate people and use over-the-top rhetoric. And then their activism was totally counterproductive, and they committed horrific things. Well, firstly, they started committing criminal acts and robberies, and then they murdered the Oakland school superintendent. And in fact, Westbrook planted disinformation to members of the Symbionese Liberation Army, that this guy, the superintendent named Marcus Foster, was colluding with the FBI and was developing a system to spy on students, especially radical students in Oakland, in the Black community in inner city schools. And it was complete disinformation. Foster was really a good guy, a good educator who was trying to improve the school system in Oakland and had worked quite tirelessly to try and do that. But they made him out like he was a government agent and out to promote surveillance. And then they carried out his assassination. They whipped it in people's head that he was an enemy, and then some agent provocateur who were working with DeFreeze planned the murder, and they murdered Foster. So this dastardly act, and it made the left look crazy and like they're just terrorists. And then they kidnapped Patty Hearst and they brainwashed her. She was an heiress of the Hearst fortune, which was William Randolph Hearst was like the Rupert Murdoch of his day. He set up all these tabloid newspapers, and they promoted sensationalistic stories and often war propaganda, yellow journalism and war propaganda.
He was the U.S.'s version of Robert Maxwell, basically.
Absolutely.
Robert Maxwell did it over there, and at the same time, Hearst was doing it over here.
Yeah. And you can visit the Hearst Castle. I was out there, and it was beautiful where he lived. But when you start to look into how he made his money, like most rich people, it was horrible. But anyway, so she was the heir, and she was an apolitical youth. Her fiance said she even, had these kind of snobby attitude. Like when they had the farm workers movement in California, she kind of snickered at it, and she would make certain demeaning comments about poor people. So she was not political and kind of snobby. But then they kidnapped her and they brainwashed her. They subjected the same mind control that the MK Ultra operatives had imposed on DeFreeze. Then they imposed on her, and they got her to and she may have been raped, and she was a very pretty girl, and they got her to participate in these robberies and kidnappings, which garnered huge publicity. And yes. I think they took some hostages, and one of the demands was that her father would feed all the poor people, and they were in Oakland, and they were trying to raise awareness. So it made like it had a leftist cause of feeding the poor and exposing the injustices of the society, inequities where we had such great wealth and poverty. But I mean, this is they were doing criminal acts, and they got her to participate in crime, and she was prosecuted, but ultimately exonerated by the Carter administration.
Isn't that interesting that she was involved? I wondered about that, and that is, so Patty Hearst is involved in bank robberies, in
Yeah,
kidnappings. You get life for that, but she
yeah.
walked. She never spent a day, never got a day.
I don't think, yeah, I don't think she got much. She was prosecuted but exonerated. Yeah, I'd
Right,
have
right,
to
right. I mean,
look
well, she
up.
was never
You may
found
be
guilty in.
right that she may have. I don't know if she spent any time at all in prison. That I'm not sure. Some of the others got life sentences. It's usually the patsies get the life sentences.
Right,
The
or the
CIA
bullet.
people, they like in the Foster murder, they set up, and they know how it became like a cult-like environment, and they manipulate people. Cult leaders are very good manipulators. And you had that as well with the Weather Underground in that period. It drew in young people who were really angry about the Vietnam War and kind of in rebellion against their parents, and had legitimate grievances, but they manipulate them and they get them to go too far, to suspend their own rational judgment through various techniques. And the CIA knows that's what they study. And through MK Ultra, they developed these programs to manipulate people. So they manipulated these young people, and young people are not always thinking clearly. The
Right.
brain is not fully developed. They're very passionate about certain causes, and they're pretty easy to manipulate into taking extremes. And that's what happened here. And it's a mix of provocateur and youth that they manipulated. And it ended in a blowout. Like there was a hostage taking situation, and then the LAPD descended on a safe house where I think they lured a lot of because some of the Symbionese Liberation Army members didn't actually commit any crimes, or may have been loosely affiliated with the group. Like there was a guy, I followed a story a bit, named Willie Wolf, and actually he had been a student of Colton Westbrook, and everybody said he was really a great guy. Even Patty Hearst said she was the kindest person she ever met, and he was into all the radical causes of the era, and he had some loose affiliation with SLA. He wasn't involved in the murders or robberies, and he was friends with some of the people, and they lured him and others into this safe house, and the police the police were tipped off that they're all there, and they descended on the house and they murdered everybody, and they used overwhelming firepower. And like there's the forensic evidence showed there was no fire, nobody was firing back at them. And I mean, I think they had to kill DeFreeze because he knew too much. He could have spoke about how he was recruited by the CIA. The goal was to kill him and kill everybody. And one woman was trying to run from the house, and like she was shot in the back,
Wow.
and they just like assassinated people and lured them. And it wasn't the police methods were not the word kosher, let's say, not legal or moral in any way. And they killed all these people, and it was a destructive end to the group. So, and it helped, and it goes well with the Manson. What we've learned about the Manson murders from Tom O'Neill's study provide a lot of concrete proof. What many suspected was that Manson had been a police informant, and was also, I think, part of the MK. Manson was a petty criminal who they also transformed into this cult leader and manipulated these hippie girls into committing these dastardly crimes. And it was part of the same process. And this was in California. It's designed to create a negative image of the 60s era movements and turn the public off of the counterculture and the hippie movement, and destroy the SDS.
Well,
And that
yeah, I
goes.
was going to say this. If you look, a whole lot of these really outlandish things um, that were supposed left or whatever that you would find out, and people that was and that would end up were out of Northern California, oftentimes, in fact, but out of California. Jim Jones, the
Yeah,
guy with the that we talked about a while back with Guyana, and the what was the name of the group where they supposedly committed suicide?
the People's Temple. And I think this is part of the same process, because that was also a more of a left wing. Like Jones was supposedly this progressive preacher, and
Right.
he drew a lot of these young people who were looking for some connection to religion, but didn't like the traditional church.
And
And
he
he
had a lot
brought
of black people,
yes,
because it was supposedly, standing up for black people who were being oppressed and all of that, so he drew in a lot of black people who were upset about racism and things at the time, and then inclined towards religion. But it was all of this stuff, how convenient, whether it was Jim Jones and the People's Temple, all of this stuff was right out of the same area in Berkeley, Oakland, Northern California. Like, they had some huge operations going on there, and
yeah.
that the left, kind of hippie left, was coming out of that area, and these operations all came out of that area.
Exactly, and that was all designed to destroy the hippie left and make it look like it was just all a cult and violence. And yeah, because Jones, was associated with the hippie movement, and so look, he got them to drink the Kool-Aid and all kill themselves, and it was just this sadistic cult. So I think all this goes together. It was a larger program to destroy, to discredit, and destroy the left wing and hippie movements out of California, and it leads to a dystopian environment today where we have two right wing parties and we have no movements to challenge that in any effective way.
Yeah, I think you're. I think you're right. The other thing that's interesting in this article, and that's just doesn't shock me at all. Good old Ronald Reagan. The behavior modification programs at Vacaville were supported by Ronald Reagan and Earl Bryant and counterinsurgency advisors William Harriman, who were intent on destroying the 1960s era protest movement. What's interesting about that is Ronald Reagan, a guy who was certainly ready to work, working with the CIA and intelligence. And eventually, what happened when Ronald Reagan became president, and who became his vice president? CIA operative named George H.W. Bush, who was allegedly involved in the JFK assassination, might I add. And additionally, the CIA pulled that operation where they worked with, the Iranian people to make sure that the Iranian Revolution, to ensure that the hostages weren't released, to help get Reagan elected. So here's a guy who was working with the CIA in California, who was an ardent anti-leftist guy, who eventually the CIA helped him become president. It sounds like he was, like so many other presidents, a CIA, if not operative, then at least ally at minimum.
Are you saying Reagan?
Reagan, yeah.
Yeah, well, Reagan, yeah, he was definitely a CIA ally. I mean, he had connection like with the FBI during the McCarthy era when he was the head of the Screen Actors Guild. He worked with the FBI. I think there's a lot of new documentation of that to try to identify communists or leftists. In the Hollywood Screen Actors Guild and with the Hollywood 10. And then there's a book by Seth Rosenfeld about how he engineered the removal of Clark Kerr as the president of the University of California, who was supposedly too soft on the Berkeley free speech movement and campus protests, although the campus protesters hated Kerr and saw him as this hypocritical, mainstream liberal figure, the way we kind of look at a Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or an Obama or that type liberal today, how hypocritical they were in voicing certain liberal values, but then really supporting conservative and warlike policies. So, but yeah, Reagan worked, I think, with the FBI to engineer his removal as president of the University of California. So, I think he has strong ties going back to certainly the FBI that are documented. And yeah, he did everything to support this. Well, the CIA, through the October surprise, put him in the White House. I mean, they recognized he was their champion over Jimmy Carter. And, they deliberately, there was a scheme that I think Bush was centrally involved in, as well as William Casey. Reagan had strong connection going back with William Casey, who was a OSS operative and CIA operative who became the head of the CIA under Reagan, and he had a career as an investment banker, pioneered the use of offshore banking and assisting the rich to offshore their money to avoid paying taxes. And Casey was the key engineer of the October surprise, where they blackmailed the Iranians to delay the release of the hostages that were taken in the Iranian Revolution, to make Jimmy Carter look bad, and put Reagan in the White House. So the CIA helped install him in the White House, and his ties with Casey, his ties with the FBI, probably CIA. I mean, we don't know.
Well, let me say this. I think the CIA, I believe this, I think the CIA probably were instrumental in trying to kill Reagan. And I think at that time, I think they wanted George H.W. Bush to be president, their CIA master, George H.W. Bush, to be president. I think they tried to kill Reagan. And I told people this story when I was in law enforcement, because I was like a regional commander at the time. The guy that shot Reagan, Hinckley, he was at St. Elizabeth's in DC, right? There's a park called Sandy Point State Park. If you leave DC and go straight up Route 50 towards the Bay Bridge, maybe a half hour or so. So I would say 35, 40 minutes max. This is a huge, beautiful park, state park. It has beaches and boat ramps and everything right at the Chesapeake Bay. Very extremely popular, just place, right near Baltimore, Washington, everything right there. This massively populated area. Okay, Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia, you name it, massively populated area. Annapolis. Okay, I got a call one week, and they said, "Oh yeah, we just wanted to let you know we got a van coming down for St. E. And John Hinckley's going to be in it." And I'm like, what? The guy that shot Reagan? Yeah, he's going to. So basically every week or maybe a couple weeks, a van from St. They didn't put him in jail. They put him in a mental hospital. And John Hinckley would get in a van full of people. They'd come down to the beach and they just go wander around the beach, grilling. And I'm like, whatever. You can walk up and talk to him if you wanted to. Swimming. How the hell do you shoot the president of the United States and you're in a van every week or so going down? I could testify in a court of law that I remember when my agency, we were notified, when I personally was notified, John Hinckley will be at Sandy Point State Park this weekend at the beach having a blast. What the hell? Because they would notify us different things like, hey, we want you to let you know a bunch of guys from the Capitals, the Caps hockey team, are going to be down at this park or here or there, whatever. Let us know in case there was incidents, and so we could have, officers in the area. But Hinckley was there. I mean, there was no point in having extra officers. It was like a friggin' second home to this guy. So doesn't it seem a little suspicious to you that the guy that shot Reagan doesn't get a day in jail? The guy that shot Reagan, within a few years after he tries to shoot the president, he's wandering around a friggin' park unattended, and then he gets out. How the hell? You could shoot a guy in a liquor store. I had another guy, he got life. He had shot a guy in a liquor store. He was would come to our agency. I was in charge of a regional center, and he would come there, the prisoners that they drop off to clean and cut the grass, like a work release kind of program stuff, jobs for the prisoners. So they dropped this guy, and I sit there and talk to him, and he's like, yeah, I was only like 16. I don't know what the hell I was doing. I was stupid, and I was drugs. And this guy was like in his 50s. I don't know what the hell he was. He was a lot older. This guy had shot a guy in a liquor store, and he had life. But a guy in prison, and he had been like 20 or 30 years or whatever the hell since he had been, had any opportunity to do anything. But you shoot the president and you go to Sandy Point every week and then you walk. Seems suspicious. I'm just saying. That's a story I think people need to know.
Absolutely. And yeah, with regard to Reagan and the CIA, I want to add that, a lot of people he was associated with had deep CIA ties, like Dr. Earl Bryan, his health secretary, was actually owned a company that stole computer software from Bill Hamilton, an NSA official, that was used by the CIA to facilitate money laundering, the so-called Promise software, which I think we've discussed
before
on the show. So how is this guy in his cabinet And Earl Bryan was a key person, also involved with the October surprise. And then there's this guy Herman, who was involved in the Phoenix Project. Yeah, I mean, I think Reagan had deep connection with the CIA. But you're right. I think ultimately they wanted George Bush as the president. And yeah, Hinckley had very close connection with the Bush family. I think I wrote something about that, and I forget all the details off the top of my head, and you probably know more than me on that. So
Yeah, it didn't make sense. He shot Reagan because he wanted to,
yeah,
impress Jodie Foster. The whole thing didn't make sense. And he
yeah,
goes into a mental, and it made me think he goes into a mental hospital. He's all crazed out, MK Ultra. You know what I mean? They drug him. He goes berserk. It just, the whole thing didn't make sense. Anyway, let's continue with back to the Symbionese liberation and the whole
yeah, because that's Dr. Earl
Cointelpro.
Bryan. He was a key associate of Reagan, and he was a key figure in the Promise software theft, who I think also may have had some involvement in the Phoenix Project in Vietnam. So
Wow. That's interesting. The Freeze received special privileges at Vacaville, including conjugal visits. So this guy is in Vacaville in this CIA, this place, prison, whatever, where they did CIA mind control and experiments on people. Which I saw. There's some guy sued them, and in fact, one of the prisoners filed a lawsuit against them. But at any rate, what's interesting is one of the women who visited him was Patty Hearst. Isn't it weird that some guys in a prison / CIA operation place, and the daughter of one of the richest men in the United States just happens to come by and visit him?
yeah, and they were bringing him women. I mean, it was a totally corrupt process where he's supposed to be a prisoner, and in exchange for his cooperation, this experiment, which ultimately is getting him killed, and grooming him into a cult leader, they bring in all these women for him. They're facilitating like a brothel in a prison, and they're taking advantage of the fact that a lot of white women at that time were like enamored, had this kind of hero worship of these black revolutionary type leaders. So they seized on that to set up this kind of brothel in the prison, and it's just wrong on so many levels.
Well, as soon as I see this, Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, California Medical Facility, when I see that they got prisoners and they're rehabbing them and it's a medical facility, they're experimenting on these people. Let me add this. It was established in 1955. Let's see, what years were
Yeah, MK
Operation
Ultra.
and Operation
That
Paperclip?
was the heart of MK Ultra. Yeah.
They
And it
bring all of
started.
these Nazi people over here that
Yeah.
are doing experiments on people, the Operation Paperclip, and what do you know? The MK Ultra, all of this pops up at the same time, 1955. It stinks of they brought these Nazi Joseph Mengele, Angel of Death style doctors over, and like, hey, we got an idea. Let's go after some people here. Why not set something up? I think we can have some fun. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and if you look into the records of MK Ultra, and now I think we discussed that on this show, and I recently did an article because there are these newly declassified documents that the National Security Archive at George Washington had on their website, and they discussed quite candidly the kind of medical experiments they were doing, including pumping a lot of LSD in people, and including experiments with trying to hypnotize and program people. And certain CIA doctors bragged, they said, "Oh, we can create an assassin. Give us, I think, 2 months or 3 months, and we'll create an assassin." They openly bragged about this, and some of this has come out in the documents that they were experimenting with these kind of things. Heavy experimentation on hypnosis and brainwashing, creating assassins and manipulating people to do things. So creating cult leaders is part of it, and getting them to manipulate people, and they establish control over these patients. I think through hypnosis and through the MK Ultra methods, they have complete control. They establish complete control over them, so they can tell them exactly what to do. So they can tell the freeze exactly. They tell him or the people in their orbit working with him, write this communique in this way, and it has to use certain code word, like they have to reference the police as pigs, and because that's going to alienate a lot of middle America, and use this over. If you read the communiques, which this book by Schreiber quotes some of the communiques, and it's just like over the top stuff, and what they're calling for, and that's the CIA's playbook. They're trying to create, and they do that today. I think they infiltrate the left-wing groups or media, and try and get them to do counterproductive things, either to disrupt the organization, to make them ineffective in various ways, including by promoting over-the-top rhetoric or analysis. So I think that's part of the programming and what they're getting him to do. And it's all part of the game, and it's an experiment. But it has, it proved to be very effective, because the Bay Area left did collapse, and these groups created a very negative impression, and so did the People's Temple. And they were carrying out MK Ultra because there was a study. MK Ultra officially was exposed in the Church Committee hearings, and Sidney Gottlieb, the head of MK Ultra, was brought before the Church Committee and was kind of exposed. And so it was officially ended in 1975. But then there was a study by a professor at Berkeley who determined that MK Ultra continued under the oversight of religious cults, including the People's Temple under Jim Jones, who was a CIA operative. He was outed as a CIA agent in Brazil in the 1960s. And they discovered at Jonestown after the massacre, which was not for suicide, most of the people were murdered, that they discovered all these drugs associated with MK Ultra, including things like Thorazine, and drugs that could be used for various purposes, and that were typically used in MK Ultra experiments. A huge amount was found on the Jonestown compound in Guyana. So that was being used as a cover for continued MK Ultra operations.
Didn't the congressman that they killed was going after the CIA, wasn't he?
Correct. Yes, and I think they lured him there. He had been investigating misdeeds. I think his daughter had got caught up in the religious cult. Yeah, his name was Leo Ryan. Mm-hmm. He had sponsored the Ryan Hughes Amendment that called for strong congressional oversight over the CIA, and that any covert operation had to be approved by Congress. And imagine if you look at the situation today, where the House and Senate, they set up the House and Senate Intelligence Committee after the Church Committee hearing to be a watchdog of the CIA, but it's done the exact opposite. It helps cover up for the CIA, lie for the CIA, like with this Russiagate stuff. But anyway, Ryan was one of the few, in that era, with the church hearing, and stuff was coming out about the CIA, the Phoenix program, and coups and stuff, and you had a small number in Congress who were determined to rein in the agency, and Ryan was at the top of that. He really, and that was a very strong amendment, Ryan Hughes, but they lured him. Now his daughter, I believe, got caught up in some religious cult, so he also had an issue, an interest in exposing them. And then he was tipped off about some nefarious thing that the People's Temple was doing. So he was lured to carry out an investigation in Guyana, and that was his district. He was a representative in San Francisco, so some of his constituents were deeply concerned about it and had family members in Guyana. They didn't know what was going on with them. They wanted him to get them home. But he was lured there, and they murdered him. He was murdered by people in military fatigues, and then they set up a patsy. I forget the name because I did an article on this. Leighton, this guy, Leighton, the Leighton family was connected, and the Leighton father had been like head of the Army chemical warfare experiments and worked at Fort Dugway, Utah, and was very heavily involved in Army experiments, including with chemical and biological warfare. And that family was tied with Jim Jones. And they fingered the younger brother. They said he had murdered Ryan after going crazy, but in fact, there was evidence that it was men in military fatigues that had assassinated him. So that was a part of this sadistic thing. They had to destroy the left wing groups and kill a congressman who was devoted to reining in the CIA, and they got rid of Church in his own way too. The CIA poured in a huge amount of money to his opponent in the 1980 election and ensured his defeat. And then he got cancer, and there's suspicion about that, since the CIA has a drug to create cancer in people. And they did that probably with Jack Ruby, who could have talked about what really went on in the JFK assassination. So they had a way of getting rid of these people. And it gets to where we are today with the CIA, where liberals are just praising the CIA. And there's nobody in Congress is challenging them at all. And the events of the 70s were crucial in setting the groundwork for what we see today, this dystopic atmosphere. And we see, what's brought fascism and totalitarianism to the United States is the CIA. They've always had a fascistic mindset. They've carried out fascistic coups in countries all around the world. They carry out dirty tricks on a routine basis, including murder and assassination. And they often joke about it. They seem to enjoy doing sadistic things. They recruit sociopathic people who rise in that agency, particularly the covert arm. You have some on the political analyst, intelligence analyst side. You have some smart and some are decent professional people. But on the covert action side is where you get the sociopathic types, and you can study their history, their books about figures like George White, how they lured but he got started. He was involved heavily with the MK Ultra in the early day with Sidney Gottlieb, who was a sociopath. Even his own son, would tell his friends, "Stay away from my father. He kills people."
Wow.
Sidney Gottlieb traveled around the world finding poison and would send people into exotic locations to find poisons. That a lot of that came out in the church hearing, how they were developing weapons and means of killing people. And there's a good biography of Gottlieb by Stephen Kinzer, and he's known as CIA's Dr. Death.
Wow.
And it's serious. The kind of people who are threats are people like in the hippie movement who want to change American society for the better, or develop more compassionate government, or a society that doesn't just go on killing sprees around the world, whether it's Vietnam or then Gaza, Ukraine today. Maybe we wouldn't have that if this movement had grown out of the 60s to push us into a more humane government. But instead, they had to destroy the movement, kill congressmen like Ryan who were doing their job well, so they had to kill them.
Yeah, I think they killed Wilson. I think they killed a lot of people. Let me ask you this. Let's go to today. When we talk about Russiagate, right? Russiagate now, some things are coming out. As soon as it came out, people like you and I just smelled, intelligence operation all over it. I still remember one of the most blatant intelligence operations, and that was in England, and that was the father and daughter that they killed with the Novichok.
The Skripal,
The
I have an
Skripal.
article on that coming
Well,
out.
what was interesting about that? like this is a poison called Novichok, right? So this is Novichok, one of the deadliest poisons in the world. If you come anywhere near it, you'll be dead in like 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever, right? And there's only a few places in the world that can possibly be found, and one of them was 3 miles from where the Scripples were at Porton Down, right? Like or I don't know, I think it was 11 miles. Anyway, it was a few miles. Porton Down, the facility, one of the only places in the world you could find this Novichok was just a few short miles from where the Scripples were. And this is a disease. I mean, this is a poison that will kill you in minutes. Everybody in the area, anybody near it, you touch it, you smell it, you're dead. And we're supposed to believe that somebody smeared it on a doorknob, that the Scripples touched the doorknob, and they didn't die instantly. They walked around for 4 hours. They went into a pizza shop. They had pizza. The last time I checked, most people don't use a knife and fork for pizza. They reach down and grab the pizza with Novichok all over their hands. Of course, the Novichok that kills you in 30 to 90 seconds or something like that. 120 seconds, you're dead. I'm supposed to believe they had Novichok on their hands. They ate pizza-laced, Novichok-laced pizza. And then after 4 hours, this poison that kills you in minutes, finally, they both walked over and sat down to feed the ducks, and simultaneously were overcome by the Novichok. It is the most preposterous story. And then we've never seen them since.
Yeah.
They're gone. Where are they? The Russians can't talk to them. Nobody can talk to them. They just both decided they never wanted to talk to anybody again. They're dead. They're dead. And it wasn't Novichok that killed them. That's my opinion. Your thoughts on, and I see that all as part of Russiagate, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a book. John Helmer is one of the few Western journalists based in Moscow, and he's written 2 books on this topic. And he sent me the recent book that I have a review of that should be coming out in the next few weeks. And he lays out a lot of what you're saying, and he investigated the case. And it was very clear exactly what you're saying, that it made no sense. And also the police, from my memory in reading his book, it's been a few months since I read it, but I think a policeman came to investigate this doorknob, and Helmer said he would have been dead immediately if there was actually Novichok on their doorknob, and he had no symptoms at all. And then there was this other case related, this woman, Dawn Sturgis.
Yes. Apparently they said they found that 2 people, they were supposedly drug addicts, that they found a perfume bottle that was sealed. And they opened the perfume bottle, they found it in a trash can, and they squirted it around for whatever reason. And she died and her boyfriend didn't. So it ain't all that poison after all. I mean, if you can spray it all over creation and some guy does and it doesn't kill you, it's not all that bad. Maybe we could put it in our cereal. Maybe it's a superfood like kale.
Yeah. So, I mean, it reminded me also of the Syrian chemical weapons, because like those scenes were staged, and like there's a picture of an aid worker or supposed rescue worker like standing at the site of this alleged chemical weapon attack, and he's fine. He's not even wearing any protective gear, and he doesn't die. And then all the doctors in the hospital said there were no attacks. Although like there was some mysterious, kids were brought in one of the cases like late at night. It's like, where are these kids? Where are their parents, and what are kids doing out late at night on the street with no parents? And then there was a reported abduction of kids in the next town a few days earlier. But like doctors were saying there was no chemical attack. They just brought in some kid late at night, and they staged these photos, and there's suddenly animals on the scene, and like even the animals didn't die. So, or like they brought in a dead goat, and one of them they staged a photo where there was a dead goat, but like there was no marks indicating that goat had either walked there or there was no footprints. So it's clear somebody put him there. So these are related because they seize on Russians use chemical warfare, Assad chemical attack. These are supposedly the worst attack form of killing. So it's designed to paint the Russians and the Assad government in the most sadistic light.
Remember Navalny?
Navalny, yeah, that was
That was
another fake
Novichok,
poisoning.
where the guy gets sick. He goes to the hospital in Russia. He's in the hospital for like a couple weeks, and they say, "Well, he'd like to go to Germany." So okay, the Russians are like, "What the hell?" Off he goes. He's free to go to Germany. He goes to Germany, and the Germans say, "It's Novichok." And if
Yeah,
you remember, what they said was, yes, it was put in his tea in the airport. And the Russians say, well, great, we've got cameras. We'll take a look. No, come to think of it, it was put in water bottles. And he drank the water, and then somebody smuggled the water bottles out, and we've got them in England. In England, and the Russians say, "Okay, that's a good idea. Great, let's get the info in the water bottles." They go, "Come to think of it, somebody put it on the inside of his underwear, and he put his underwear on." And I'm thinking, how many? It was in his tea, then it was in water bottles that you smuggled out, but then it wasn't, and now it's smeared on his underwear. And Novichok doesn't kill anybody. It didn't kill him. The most deadly poison known to man.
yeah,
And every time they ask a different question, the way it was applied changes, and none of it ever kills anybody, except the
yeah.
Skripals, of course.
Yeah, yeah, and the Skirple, yeah, they knew they were dead because like a member of their family died, and they were very close to him. Her, I think it was a grandmother or his mother, Sergei's mother died, and like he didn't contact anyone in his family, attend the funeral, and like they said, he was very close to his mother. So,
Well,
and
he's
yeah,
close to her now, that's for sure.
yeah, and it shows that these are deadly. Like what I was saying, that these people are. I mean, these are cold-blooded killers because innocent lives. They're killing innocent people, and it's fun. It's fun and games for them, and they can get away with it because of these larger geopolitical intrigues, and they get away with this murder and mayhem. And somebody has to hold them accountable, like the rest of us. We can't just go around murdering people, and their human lives are destroyed. And it's obvious. Yeah, the problem is people don't really look into it much. They just see a headline or maybe one story in a BBC or a CNN, and it skews it to make it look like, oh, the Russian poisoned him, and they're evil and they're assassins, and people just kind of believe that narrative. But once you start to look into it, even just a little bit, it makes no sense. Everything they're saying, there's clear sign of staging and outright murder, as you're pointing out. So,
Do you remember? And all of this I see is it's all one, the Russiagate stuff with Trump. When the Ukraine conflict started, there was a town called Bucha.
yeah,
And they said, yes, the Russians killed all of these people and just innocent people and left them laying in the street and all this kind of stuff. And just when the Russians left town, they slaughtered everybody. And people were like, well, the Russians, but here's the bodies laying out. And people were like, the Russians left town like 4 days ago. And these bodies just laid in the street for 4 days and nobody noticed, and they're not deteriorating and nobody moved them. I mean, you go through a town and they had like bodies laying at every driveway when you drive by, and you're like, they lay there for 4 days and it never dawned on anybody, hey, let's report this. There's bodies at every driveway. Nothing. And the Russian says, okay, let's take the names. Let's get the Russian said, we need an international investigation. And the US was like, no, we don't NATO. Nah, we don't need an international investigation. And the Russians said, well, how about the names? Let's go with this. The names of all the people that were killed, we'll hand them over to the UN. We'll look into that. How about the names? No, never one name of a person that was killed. No international investigation, no nothing. So I see these as all. Do you think I'm wrong in seeing all of these as one big ongoing kind of anti-Russian, kind of Cold War-esque Part 2 operation?
absolutely, yeah. And this has been going on for 10 years. And these phony incidents have been used to ratchet up, to whip up Russophobia, anti-Russia hysteria, to ratchet up sanctions, to justify all the billions of dollars that go into Ukraine, and basically justify using Ukraine as a proxy to wage a direct war on Russia. And yeah, there's so many incidents that are fraudulent. The downing of the MH17 airline, and John Helmer is a great journalist who's worked in Russia, and he's done a lot of investigation into these incidents, and he's written books on some of them, like the Skripals, and he has a book on MH17 and he showed that it could have only come from a Ukrainian Air Force. It had the trajectory of the missile showed that it was air to air, not surface to air, and only the Ukrainian Air Force had the capability. The People's Militia in Donbass didn't have their own Air Force. And so it was just, it couldn't have been just the logistics that he analyzed made clear it could not have been, because they claim that it was the Russians, who shot down the airliner and the Donbass People's Army. But he showed that it could only be the Ukrainian Air Force. And that was, presented in and there were so many other, I can't remember all the details, but I just know he exposed a complete fraud, and there was just no evidence to back up. Just like what we're saying, that if you look into it even just a little bit, you see right away the official story makes no sense, and there's all these anomalies. So that's another big one. And I think these are, it's just like propaganda, one after the other. Russian interfered in the election, and now more and more evidence has come to light that is complete fraud. There's the Gabbard documents show that even the intelligence community had no evidence of that, and was kind of pushing back against that notion in some of their internal reports that they kept suppressed, and they promoted these alarmist claims before the public. And now we're getting the internal documents where the own intelligence is saying, at best we have low confidence, which means they don't have any proof. And others are saying we just don't have evidence of this cyber hacking and stuff like that. So, but they suppressed that. And Obama even ordered a new investigation because the old ones didn't have any evidence. So he said, do a new one that's basically says they were, hacking and rigging the election for Trump. And, even it looks like Putin, from one of the documents that was just released, Putin may have had some information about Hillary Clinton's health problem and anger management issues, which are well known because I researched the Clintons going back, and I interviewed people and also just read a lot of books that are kind of like off the beat presses about the Clintons when they were governor of Arkansas, and they had interviews with people who worked for the Clintons, and many said she had these blow-ups. She was completely different on the camera. Off camera, she was very difficult to deal with, cruel. They had very negative things to say about her. So I can believe that. And anyway, allegedly Putin had some information he chose not to, negative stuff that Russian intelligence had amassed, and he chose not to, say anything about that publicly. So we're getting that kind of information. So that's just, one thing. Yeah, I agree with you. It's just, it's repeated, and it started with the sanctions in 2012, because Obama had a reset policy. Bush, after Putin didn't support the war in Iraq, because U.S.-Russian relations started well in the first George W. Bush. There were good relations in that period coming out of the 90s. And Putin was supposed to be Yeltsin's successor. But then when the U.S. went to war in Iraq, and Putin started cracking down on some oligarchs that were pro-U.S., that's when relations started to sour. But then Obama said he was going to do a reset policy and restore good relations. But then you had the Magnitsky affair, where you had this guy named Bill Browder, who was this hedge fund billionaire, who invented the story that the Russians had killed this whistleblower named Sergei Magnitsky. Well, in fact, Magnitsky was not a whistleblower. He was helping Browder to evade taxes in Russia and carry out like white-collar crimes and help him avert prosecution. Eventually, Browder was prosecuted, but he made up the story, and Browder stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the Russian government, and they were trying to prosecute him. He made up the story that the Russian government had defrauded him, and Magnitsky was blowing the whistle on that, when in fact Magnitsky was cooperating with Russian authorities in the case against Browder. And when Magnitsky was in prison, Browder didn't raise any concern that he was being mistreated or that he was a political prisoner, which he was not. only after he died, he started inventing the story the Russians killed him. And then he lobbied. He had the connection. He had the money. He was tied with these Wall Street investment houses who funded politicians on the Hill. And I think he hired Dick Cheney's press secretary as his publicist. And she got a meeting with John McCain and Kerry and others. And they pushed through this Magnitsky bill to sanction Russian officials. That was the first act of sanctions in December 2012 that Obama signed. And that ended the reset policy, put us on a trajectory of the new Cold War. And then after that, it was one thing after the other, how Putin was a madman. Because I followed, in researching my book, The Russians Are Coming Again, I followed press coverage of Putin. And actually, Putin was presented very favorably from 2000, when he first came into office, through 2003. The media presented him very positively, like the New York Times, media like that. It was only later that this demonization took root, and it's been incessant demonization and propaganda, and there's no opportunity for any kind of objective analysis. I mean, usually there's some truth behind the propaganda. I mean, we know Putin has a kind of hard-edged, more authoritarian leader, but you can't develop any kind of nuanced or balanced assessment of why he's popular in Russia. It's just this often ridiculous demonization and these fabricated incidents, accusing Russia of one thing after the other, and including assassinations. A lot of those assassinations they attribute to Putin are not proven at all. And in fact, I got a book by Amy Knight, who's a strong, I would say, anti-Putin, even Russophobic author, but she is an honest researcher, at least, who acknowledges a lot of these cases, like going back to the there was this Russian dissident who died. I forgot his name for some reason, but she admits that the evidence is not
the one that they said poisoned or something. That guy, the one that.
Yeah, this is a while back. That was one of the first they accused him of poisoning a guy, Putin. But Amy Knight acknowledges the evidence is not definitive by any means. And in that case, it's suspected that it may have actually been Western intelligence agents who killed him to set up Putin, to make Putin look bad. Anyway, yeah, there's just incident after incident, and it's part of this relentless anti-Russian demonization and propaganda to build public support for a new Cold War and war. And it's recreated the McCarthy climate, and it's targeted the liberals. I think they're smart. They realize, well, let's get the liberals, because in the 50s, it was more the conservatives who were supporting Joseph McCarthy. And I think there was a religious dimension in the 50s. In the original Cold War, it was because the Soviets had a more atheistic ideology, so they targeted like religious groups and religious conservatives. They played up, the atheism and supposed evil of communism. So now their tactic was to target the liberal audience, and so they, which traditionally is more anti-war and averse to foreign intervention. So they targeted them. So they targeted liberal media is completely biased on this, and they're still clinging to the Russiagate myths, like in New York Times, CNN. Those are the worst. They're even far worse on this issue than Fox News. Academia is horrible on this. So that's been their target, to get the liberals. And then I think that's why they picked on this idea of Trump-Putin bromance, and you had these New York Times columnists thinking it's cute to constantly harp on this idea of a bromance with Trump and Putin. And they even had an article, of Trump, they're doing a dance together, and they think it's funny. But what it is disguised war propaganda, and it should be called out as that. And it's not real journalism at all. It's what William, to bring back full circle, it's what William Randolph Hearst did in his day with the yellow journalism to build support for like the Spanish-American War and World War I.
Let me add this. Bill Browder, it's interesting you bring up him, the guy behind the Magnitsky Act. If people want to know more about him, there's a movie out called Magnitsky Act behind the scenes. I interviewed the guy who made that movie. He said when he made the movie, he thought Bill Browder was telling the truth, and he was making a documentary to support Bill Browder. About halfway through, he started realizing that none of the things made sense. You know, he was doing a critical evaluation of the information. And so he called Bill Browder in and said, hey, we need to have a talk. Browder comes in and goes, look, you told me this, this, and this. I looked into Sergei Magnitsky. You told me he's a lawyer. I checked with the people he worked with, his background. He has no background in law. He has no law degree. He's never been to law school. The people that he worked with said he was an accountant, you know, blah, a bookkeeper, blah, blah, blah. And he starts hitting Bill Browder saying all the things in your story. What do you have to say? Because he thought Browder was going to mitigate these things. Browder attacked him and called him a Putinist and all that kind of stuff, right? So then he went on and finished the documentary, the Magnitsky Act behind the scenes, and basically showed what he found, that it was a pack of lies. Now, here's the interesting about Bill Browder. His father or grandfather, I forgot which one, was named Earl Browder. Earl Browder was the head of the Communist Party in the United States. I suspect he was a CIA operative too. Another thing, Bill Browder's mentor was a guy, I forgot his name, but he owned a bank called the Republican National Bank. That was the bank.
Is it Edmund Safra?
Safra.
And Safra worked with Maxwell, Robert Maxwell.
Exactly. So, and Bill Browder worked out of what? He's been for a lot. He worked out of, what's the guy's name? Scoop Jackson, the Henry Jackson Institute, which is a Cold War neocon thing. Bill Browder worked out of the Henry Jackson Institute in London, right? Okay, so his Browder's mentor and financier and all is Edmund Safra, who ran what did people need to know who ran the Republican National Bank? What do people know about the Republican National Bank? Number one, they were the money launderers for the CIA's Air America and for all of the drug running out of South America. Number two, here's what people may not know. When they arrested the guy, when the police arrested the guys who did the break-in, who were the for the Watergate Hotel, these guys had $6,500 in brand new $100 bills that had sequential ordered serial numbers. They traced the bills back to the Republic National Bank, Edmund Safra's bank. So the guys who did the Watergate break-in were financed through the CIA bank, the same exact bank that was financing and supporting Bill Browder, who did the Magnitsky Act. The same bank, as you said, the guy Edmund Safra. Edmund Safra is also the guy who worked with Maxwell. Edmund Safra had a nurse when he was old, a male nurse, right? And everybody looked at him and said, that guy doesn't look like a nurse. He looks like a mercenary. He was like this big, muscular, former, like, killer mercenary guy. And this was his supposed nurse. Oh, by the way, Edmund Safra died in a, like, tragic, very suspicious fire in his home. You know what I mean? Like, his home burned down suspiciously and tragically. He died. And so many of them, you know what I mean? So, like, the whole Browder Magnitsky Act thing, he's tied directly to MI6 and CIA.
Absolutely, yeah. Very well said, yeah.
Yeah, so I've done, as you know, well, you know, I was a former
investigator. You've done your homework, yeah.
I've done my homework. I know these guys. I know this stuff. And Browder, from the very beginning, you know, Browder also did, he claimed that Magnitsky was a lawyer, right? He was deposed in a lawsuit in New York. I saw the video of the deposition, and they said, so he's a lawyer. He goes, he's my lawyer. They said, do you know he's never had a law degree? He's never been to law school in Russia. He didn't have a law certificate. Are you still saying he's a lawyer? He says, he's my lawyer. What the hell does my lawyer mean? My lawyer doesn't have a law degree, never been to law school. How the hell do you get to be a lawyer? Why do you call yourself a lawyer? Now, maybe if you're Abraham Lincoln just educated himself and he took the bar exam and became a lawyer. But not everybody's smart enough to do that. We ain't all Abraham Lincoln, but apparently Magnitsky was. But you get my point. The whole thing, isn't it interesting that you can go from the Magnitsky Act to his mentor, Edmund Safra, right, to Robert Maxwell, it's just like, okay. It gets kind of obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is how the CIA operates and manipulates the public and kind of rigs the political system with horrible consequences. I mean, there are over 1 million deaths as we speak in that war. I don't know how many Ukrainian soldiers have been killed, how many Russians have been killed, how many civilians have been displaced. We're dealing in millions of people. So, I mean, the human cost is just horrifying. And then, our resources are devoted into these, senseless conflicts instead of into, schools, hospitals, infrastructure. So it's just cataclysmic for society. And that's why more people need to be aware of this, because it affects all of our lives. And these narrow, sadistic elite are able to manipulate things to their advantage, to the detriment of us all.
Yeah, I'll just end by saying this. Here's an article. Notorious Edmund Safra arsonist is back behind bars where he allegedly tried to kill his wife. So the guy who burned down Safra's house and Safra died, who was a hitman, right? And they go, the convicted arsonist is undergoing treatment, blah, blah, blah. But he allegedly, he tried to arrange a hitman to kill his wife. When you go on, you go on to say, I'll just read this. In 2002, reporters from all over the world descended on the glamorous principality as the former Green Beret. So this guy was a former Green Beret, which means he was a CIA hitman. Went on trial, charged in the mysterious death of his former boss, Edmund Safra, the legendary Brazilian Lebanese bank. So this guy was the Green Beret. Meyer was the Green Beret guy, and he was charged in the mysterious death of his former boss. He worked for Edmund Safra, supposedly as a nurse or to watch him or something. And then I guess when the command was given, so we see it's all over the place. And the other thing is, this stuff is not hard to find if you just know the names to look for. You can search. It's all open source intelligence. Well, thank you very much. I've had you on 11 minutes longer than normal, but I certainly appreciate that. This is a lot of fun for people for you who is a professional in this, and me as an investigator, I just do it for fun.
Yeah.
But as soon as I hear a name, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I know where to go with this. All right.
Yeah, that's terrific.
All right. Thanks a lot. Look forward to talking to you again soon, everybody. Don't forget, go to covertactionmagazine.com. That's covertactionmagazine.com. Let me give you a picture of it. Covertactionmagazine.com. That's where you want to go. And you can find like a lot of the stuff we're talking about. We're going to talk about this Alger Hiss spy case. That's going to be interesting. JFK documents, all kinds of stuff going on there. So if you really want to have some fun, go to covertactionmagazine.com and check out all the good stuff. Dr. Jeremy Kuzmarov. Oh, you have a Substack also, don't you?
Yeah, you can check out my Substack, Too Hot for the Mainstream.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Share this on all your social media platform. Follow me on Rockfin, Rumble, stuff like that. If you can afford it, Patreon, buy me a coffee or something like that, or PayPal. That's highly appreciated. Make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.